Adam, welcome back to the Conversation Factory. It's nice to see your face. It's nice to be here again with you.
Yeah, when was it?
Oh man. So we were talking about facilitating breakthrough.
So that would have been 4 years ago because
It
that
would
came
have
out
been it would have
in
been
the
a
middle of
couple of
COVID
years.
2021. I didn't do any live
Yeah.
presentations at all.
Yeah, so I mean that was a blockbuster book. And we'll talk about lots of your books, but I just started cracking this one open. It's a really delightful book. And I think the thing that is most interesting to unpack first is you mention that systems can't be transformed if folks don't understand that they're working with a system. And I feel like systems thinking, like the recognition of what a system is and why it's important, is not universally held
Yeah,
knowledge. So I'm wondering, I
yeah.
mean, you use some ecological metaphors in the book to help people understand the system, but I'm wondering if you're sort of trying to explain that to someone that you're working with, a person who is part of a system who wants help transforming the system but doesn't use that language yet. How do you say to them, "Hey, this is what a system is, and this is why we can't transform it unless you think about it from the perspective of this is a system."
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I'll try to feel my way to an answer. I'm just going to close my door because
Sure.
there's street noise. So that's a great question, and let me feel my way to an answer. A system is a set of elements that is connected in a particular structure that produces a certain characteristic set of behaviors. And by I'm going to come to your question, but backwards. By transform it, I mean that it produces a fundamentally different set of behaviors. And I gave a talk last Friday, and the person who was on the stage with me has done a lot of work in Montreal on making Montreal a more bicycle friendly city. And
Mm,
it's a great example for many reasons. One, I guess we'd all understand what I mean. So that is a transformation. It used to be very dangerous to bicycle in Montreal, and now Montreal is a great city for bicycling in. So that's a different characteristic set of behaviors. And also, by coincidence, we both remember somebody who used to talk about this 45 years ago, an
hmm.
eccentric fellow named Bicycle Bob Silverman. And I remember meeting him when I was in high school and thinking this was really crazy. Like, where do people get these ideas? So, and thirdly, it's easy to see what it took to transform the system. I mean, I suppose it took several things, but the main thing it took was reconstructing the roads so that they have dedicated bike paths.
Yeah.
So it's a great example. It took a long time. It seemed impossible. It involved changing the structure, how the
Hmm.
cars and the bicycles related to one another, in particular that they were separated rather than sharing the same road. And I suppose there were changes in how people thought about things, cyclists and motorists, and it now produces a fundamentally different set of behavior. There's less cars on the road and many, many bicycles on the road.
Yeah.
So that's a good example, I think. And I'm
Mm,
not saying you can't, maybe I stated it too strongly. I think you can transform it without understanding it, but it's going to be hit and miss.
mm.
Yeah, I guess it'd be less likely to work if you just said, if you just decided I'm just gonna bicycle and by my individual actions, I'm gonna change this city.
Right.
I don't think that would work. I think
Yeah.
yeah, anyhow, I don't know how interested you are in that example, but
No,
it
no, no.
struck me as a very straightforward one.
As a cyclist, I'm a highly this is a perfect example. And an interesting one because I actually remember the first time that New York City had summer streets, which was, kind of a big deal when it happened. This is probably more
Hmm.
than 10 years ago where they shut down Park Avenue from like
Hmm.
95th
Hmm.
Street to like Lafayette,
Hmm.
well past the REI that may not have even been there at Houston and Lafayette. And you could bike through the road that goes around Grand Central Station,
Hmm.
which many people will only know because it's where the famous scene from the first Avengers movie happened when you circle around, the Incredible Hulk and Captain America and
Right.
everyone. Like that's this little piece of road that's usually only available to cars. It's maybe 30 feet up off the street. And being on there on a car, on a bicycle, I got a little tear in my eye because I was like, I can't believe how much the city has changed in my
Yeah.
lifetime. A city that many people would say is untamable and unchangeable. And I think it's actually an interesting link back to, or, well, not link forward to a question that I've been sitting with, which is because you point out somebody even with power and authority in a system can't necessarily transform it on their own. And in New York, we have the example of Bloomberg and Jeanette Sadiq-Khan, who was the transit, I don't know, whatever the word is escaping my
Commissioner.
brain. Commissioner, thank you. They did very quick projects where they're like, hey, we're going to put boulders here and we're going to paint this ground blue. And we're going to put some tables and chairs out. But those are physical changes.
Mm.
And there's in a system many layers to transform a system on, because now we have a lot more bicycles and bicycle lanes in New York City, but you still have people who write in places like the New York Post saying, all of this traffic we're having in New York is because of all these goddamn bike lanes. They've made traffic, and the
Mm.
city is for me and my car. And so there's
Right.
disagreement sometimes about what a system is and what behaviors or outcomes we're
Yeah.
optimizing for.
Yeah. I'm remembering there's another famous example, slightly different, which brings up a different aspect of it, and that is the city of Bogota in Colombia used to have an extraordinarily high rate of vehicular homicide, people being killed by cars. And the mayor at the time was a very innovative man, brilliant intellectual and politician named Antanas Mocus. And he had the idea that simply putting more police on the streets wouldn't do the trick. And so he did something wild and famous, which is he hired tens of mimes, like, people with white paint on their face, and they'd stand at the corners and make fun of people who were driving badly, like ridicule them. And apparently, in the minds of people in Bogota, they really don't like to be made fun of. And the rate of vehicular homicide dropped by 80%.
Shocking.
So that's interesting because it didn't involve any enforcement, any
Mm,
changes that I know of to the physical infrastructure, but it involved, I guess, changing how people thought about what they had a right to do in their car.
yeah. Yeah. And it's a really, really interesting intervention because there's all these sort of very common interventions that people would come up with, more signage, more cops,
Yeah,
bigger lanes and things like that. And just a little bit of shame and derision can do wonders, which is delightful to know. And what an interesting insight he had about the maybe the fundamental unit in a system, like the person of the
yeah,
characteristic nature of the people in his town, which speaks to, like, I guess another aspect of systems transformation is you have to understand all of these different parts and components, and the ways that they interact, and
yes,
what the characteristics of each individual component really are. Like, what are the people like and what are their interactions
yeah.
like? So I can see how, if you don't really understand that, you can't just bulldoze a result
Yeah.
through
Well, he
reliably.
had a particular result in what he called culture, and he did many things. I won't bore you with other examples, but there are four or five famous examples. But yes, and for me, the general principle, I wrote the book, I finished the book last August, but it came out this April, the book Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems, and I've been presenting it the past few months, and lots of things are becoming clearer to me through talking about it with people that weren't as clear when I was writing it. And one of them is this idea that to transform a system, you really have to understand how it works from up close.
Mm,
You have to understand the detail. And yeah, some things, I guess, can be transformed from the top down by force.
mm,
But most things, if you want them to stay transformed, require many people to do many things.
yes.
And yeah,
This makes sense to me, but I'm curious if some of the leaders you've worked with in the past, how, because I think it is a common belief or maybe a wish of some people who are at the top or in the upper components of a system, who have official power and official authority, to say, well, like, why can't we just change this? Why can't I just do this? Why can't by fiat I make this change? How do you coach a leader to open up their mind to realize they have to have this granular understanding and a maybe more multi-stakeholder or collaborative approach, given the fact that there are so many actors inside of a system that there really has to be, in some sense,
Yeah.
everyone pulling in the same direction.
Well, I want to make a distinction, which is that, as you know from our previous conversation, I am very focused on collaboration across difference, and that's been the core of my work. And I wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy: How to Work with People You Don't Agree With and Like and Trust. And that's been the center of Rios Partners' work for decades. But I'm making a bit of a different point in this book, that collaborating with others, and not necessarily everybody, and not necessarily everybody pulling in the same direction. That's part of it, but I think that the broader point is simply engaging with the system, paying attention, seeing how it works, what will work, rather than just deciding I think it ought to be this way and trying to impose it. That's the distinction I'm making this time, which is a little different. Yes, it involves working with others most of the time, but what it really involves is paying attention to how things work. And yes, what Mocus's insight about how people in Bogota, how car drivers in Bogota think. I don't know
Mm.
if car drivers in other places would think the same way. I was giving a talk a few weeks ago about the book, and somebody said, I'm listening to you, and what it really reminds me is of Robert Capa's famous statement about photography. Robert Capa was a famous war photographer, really famous, and he said once, "If your photograph isn't good, move closer." And uh, I think it's a really important idea that you're able to transform a system or contribute to transforming a system if you're close enough to be able to see how things really work. I use in the book an image which I've never used before, but I think it's working very well. This idea of working with cracks, that
Mm.
it's easy to think that a system is solid and stable and smooth, that there's no way to change it. It's like a mountain. There's no way to change it except putting a stick of dynamite and blowing it up. And there's lots of people,
Mm.
the people doing that these days, trying to
Mm.
change things by blowing them up,
Yes.
by using force or violence or
Yeah.
bombs, literally. And the book argues, well, there is an alternative. It is to pay attention to what's cracking, just like a rock climber doesn't climb a mountain, they climb the
Mm.
cracks in a mountain. And anyhow, and somebody pointed out to
So
me
I'm just
last
like to
week,
pause it. That is like an amazingly, um, that's such a subtle transformation in language that I just think it's really interesting to highlight because we say just very habitually, we climb the mountain, but you actually climb the cracks in the mountain.
well, that's where you put your toes and your fingers. But
And the handholds,
the way
yeah.
I'm bringing it back to Robert Capa is somebody pointed out to me last week, and you can't see those cracks unless you're up close.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And I want to push on this a little bit because I've been thinking, I have my own metaphor that I've been thinking about for this. So, first of all, I think it's just worth bringing Leonard Cohen into the conversation because I think
Yes.
he's the one who says cracks are where the light gets in. And it's really worthwhile to acknowledge that cracks are these places you can put your hand on and create some leverage. But when you
Yeah.
say cracks, you don't necessarily mean where the system is breaking, but where there are openings in maybe
Well,
in people's
both.
mindsets or yeah, say more about
Yeah.
what a crack is and how we can know it if we see it.
Well, a crack is where the system is already changing, at least in certain places, and it can be where it's breaking down, that this isn't working. There's an aspect of this isn't working, and so we see, oh, we thought it was working, but it's not. It's working for some people, but not for other people, or it used to
Mm-hmm.
work and it doesn't work anymore, or it works to some extent, but not further.
Mm-hmm.
Or it can be a place where people are doing something new and interesting, a bright spot. So it's either of those, but the point is it's a place where things are already moving that you can
Mm-hmm.
work with. You can widen it, you can go through it, you can leverage it. And it's the metaphor is just the opposite of nothing's happening. It's solid. It can't be changed
Mm-hmm.
unless you just take a sledgehammer or
Yes.
dynamite to it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, in physics, there's this idea of leverage, and the classic diagram in like physics 101 is it's like a seesaw, but it's off
Yeah.
center. There's this
Yeah,
little
yeah.
triangle,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
on one side you've got the object, the
Right.
thing you're trying to move, and then you've got this lever point
Right.
that gives you
Right.
quote unquote leverage, but it's really the arm on the other side that gives you the quote unquote leverage. And Archimedes has that famous quote that give me a place to stand on and a lever long enough I can move the world.
Yeah.
So I feel like cracks and leverage points, there's this dance between closeness and distance because the lever arm gives you some leverage
Yeah.
point to be able to step away and say, well, how do I really move this? And
Yeah.
the kind of well, first of all, as you look around, as that sets in with like, how does that hit you? This combination of closeness and proximity to know it, but somehow distance to be able to
Yeah.
make that effect.
Well, these are two often used metaphors: cracks, which I hadn't thought about before, and leverage points, which have been used in systems thinking for a long time. And what they have in common, I guess what they have in common is they're asking you, and I guess there's a limit to how far you can take an analogy, but
Let's
yes,
find out.
stepping back in order to see that there's things that are important here beyond the things that are right in front of me. And the
Hmm.
opposite of that is this is just about me and what I think and what I want and what I can touch personally. And often what's going on in a system, what you need to pay attention to is something that's on the other side that you can't even see from where you are. And so you don't notice it not working. That's, the example of climate change is that uh, the problem is that cause and effect are far apart in space and time. So things that happened 15 years, fossil fuels that were burned 10 years ago are having an impact now, and fossil fuels that are burned on the other side of the planet are having an impact here. So
Yeah.
yes, certain systems are big in time and space, and so just looking at what's right in front of you now doesn't help. But
Hmm.
so that's one metaphor. And the other
Hmm.
is that pay attention to what's changing and look at it closely enough. And what I'm saying by saying closely enough is what I mean is pay attention to the reality of what's happening, not
Yes.
just sitting back thinking about, I think it ought to be like this. I'm going to just make an order. It should be like this.
Yes.
And yeah, I think people at the top probably exaggerate how much impact they have, both because they're used to being deferred to.
Hmm.
But I have found often that the things that aren't working or the things that are changing are not visible to people at the top because it
Hmm.
works perfectly well for them.
Yes. Yes. Right. Which is why going outside and looking at what's really happening can be really eye opening.
And the second habit in the book or the third habit in the book, I always have to look at because I can never remember the numbers, looking for what's unseen.
Hmm.
The easiest way to see what you're not seeing is to talk to somebody with a different positionality in the system and say, how does this look like from where you are? And you'll be surprised. Geez, I hadn't seen that before. Couldn't see it from where I was. And so
Hmm.
that's one of the 7 habits for engaging with a system.
We should maybe zoom back in or zoom out. I'm not sure, and talk about, maybe an overview of the habits. But also I think this question of like how you started to think about this change in terms of this granular moment by moment, day by day, conversation by conversation change versus maybe we call it the event based, facilitation based transformation that was the sort of the bread and butter of the way you did work and do work, generally speaking. And now I'm in danger of asking a too multi-parted question because when I think about leverage, I think about these aspects of you as an outsider and the people you work with as insiders, and the
Yeah.
benefit that they get from the
Yeah.
distance you have. I mean, there's challenges you talk about in the book
Yeah.
that some people don't trust you necessarily as an outsider,
Yeah.
or as a member of the system, as a a white male when you're working with Aboriginal organizations. But there is this interesting synergy of insider and
Yeah.
outsider in creating change and
Yeah.
transformation.
Yeah. So that is a definitely multi-part.
It is. I know.
Oh, they're
That's
That's fine.
I have
Okay.
too many things that I'm curious about, and I just want you to take just take
Okay.
whatever your is most
Okay.
interesting for you in that one.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. So let me cover two aspects of that. So I got started in the work I do and that Rios Partners does in 1990 South Africa, which is a country I didn't know. I'm from Canada. I was living in London at the time, and I got invited to facilitate a series of workshops that became known as the Montfleur scenario exercise. It was 1991 was 1 year after Nelson Mandela was released from prison and 3 years before the first democratic elections that Mandela won, or that Mandela's party won, and he became president. So there were many things going on in that interregnum. As they say, the old was dying, but the new had not yet been born. And there were many activities. And I was involved in one quite small one, which was a set of workshops to think about how could the transition go. And what was special about it, at least special, was that it involved 28 people from across the whole system, which means politicians, business people, trade unionists, community activists, academics, men and women, black and white, opposition and establishment, left and right. So it was an extraordinary group. And so being able to, got a funny sound in my,
Or it may be me. I'll just mute myself while you finish your story. I think there's a truck outside that you may be cap. It's like a
oh,
sort of a
okay.
woo woo woo
Yeah,
thing.
okay, that's fine. I
Okay.
just thought it was, I thought I was being drawn into that other place that where you
No, no,
used
you're
to
good. I'm
have
going to
the
mute
bright
myself.
lights.
You
No,
can finish
that's
your story,
okay.
and hopefully this truck will finish what they're doing, and I'll edit this section out.
So this experience of facilitating this group in South Africa was extraordinary, and that's how I ended up leaving the corporate world and emigrating to South Africa and starting to do the work that I've been doing for 35 years since then. So that's an interesting example for two reasons. One, what happened in South Africa between the mid 80s and the mid 90s was an extraordinary historic example of a system being transformed imperfectly, incompletely, but it produces different results for different people than it did under the apartheid system.
Yeah.
And secondly, I met a man there. One of the 28 was a man named Trevor Manuel, who has been quite an important leader in South Africa. He's a member of the African National Congress. He was at that time the head of the ANC's Department of Economic Policy. He'd been a really important activist in the country, even during the time the ANC was illegal. When Mandela was formed the government, Trevor went into the cabinet and became the Minister of Finance, which is a very powerful position, a position he held for 13 years. So anyhow, he knows a lot about that particular system transformation. Well, he knows a lot about a lot of things, but including that. So 4 years ago, when I was launching my previous book, the one you and I spoke about, Facilitating Breakthrough, I had this idea that I would conduct these interviews with three people that, loosely speaking, could be considered great facilitators.
Hmm.
And the first of these three was Trevor Manuel, who kindly agreed to be interviewed for 30 minutes live online. And to make a long story short, it was a disaster of an interview. And because I had this idea of how transformation occurred from my position as a consultant, as a outsider, as a Canadian, as a facilitator, and he had a different idea from being an insider who was on the ground day in, day out for years, really day in, day out for years, literally. And I didn't understand what he was saying, and I kept interrupting him, and it was a fiasco. And when the half hour was up, I hung up. I got messages from my colleagues and my wife saying, "Don't quit your day job. You have no future as an interviewer."
I know we make it look easy here on the other side of the mic, but there's a lot that's like the duck. There's a lot going on down there.
Yeah,
Can't.
well, I think the main thing I learned is don't interrupt like every 3 seconds. In fact, we even tried to edit the tape so we could put it up, but it was even 2 days of editing. It just wasn't possible. It was such a disaster. Anyhow, it was embarrassing for me, but also, really puzzling. I couldn't figure out what am I missing. So looked at the transcript over and over, and I think the key thing Trevor was trying to say that I didn't understand was in retrospect, or now I understand, he was saying that, look, the way we did this is we just talked to people all the time and tried to figure out a way forward. I talked to business people in the morning, and then radical students in the afternoon. Then I'd go to a poor community. Then late at night, I'd be at party headquarters strategizing, and that's what we did. That's it. And he later had a similar description when he talked about how he did his work as the Minister of Finance. That's what gave me the idea for the book. I thought, geez, there's something here that's obvious to him that's not obvious to me that I'd like to understand, and that maybe other people would like to understand. So that was the inspiration for the book, and this idea of we know that system transformation is a collective activity. It's not one person, one time, but it still begs the question, what does each person who's contributing have to do, not occasionally, but on an everyday basis? And fast forward many interviews later, including the second interview with was Christiana Figueres, who negotiated the Paris Accord on climate change, and the third was with Juan Manuel Santos, president of Colombia, who ended the 52 year civil war and won the Nobel Peace Prize, and many other interviews working with hundreds of colleagues around the world on the text itself. Fast forward past all of that, and I come back to, okay, now I get what Trevor was trying to tell me. It's about engaging with others, but not superficially like I have a dinner engagement, but under the surface. And I use the word radical engagement because the word radical doesn't, first meaning is not extreme. It means, root or essential or fundamental. So engaging with the system, engaging with others under the surface at the root. Now, it's related to the question you asked, the second question you asked, which is the difference between what you can do as an outsider and what you can do as an insider. I've worked all my life as an outsider, and I don't think it's useless. I think it can be helpful to have somebody who's, not a partisan, not on one side or another, doesn't have so much skin in the game. But I think that role is very limited. And I think people who play that role imagine that it has more potential than it does. And somebody pointed out to me just last Friday that as soon as you engage with a system, you're by definition no longer an outsider. You're in the mix, and understanding that rather than saying, I have nothing to do with this, I'm just facilitating, I think is a rather dramatic error.
So, if going back to this question of what a crack is and how we find them, it seems like it really is a conversation by conversation, these micro interactions we have with someone, realizing that there's an opening in somebody's mental model, or just, it can be as simple as different using a different type of word and seeing that word resonates with somebody in a way that another word doesn't. It's a very granular effort that these system transformers are doing to spot these cracks, not just in the system in abstract, but in individual actors inside of the system.
Yes, you look at it that way. Okay, now that I get, let me say it another way. People often ask me, because so much of my work has been on collaborating across difference, they say, well, how could I ever work with those people? I don't like them. I don't agree with them. I don't trust them. And my answer is, well, I'm not saying you have to, but you can try to work around them or bulldoze over them. But if you think it's worth trying, then my advice is talk to them, but talk to them by trying to figure out where are they coming from. And that's amazing. It doesn't always work, but it's different from, I'm going to talk to them, I'm going to convince them they're wrong, and I'm going to get them to apologize, and they should think like me, and then we'll be fine. That's kind of like Adam Kahane interviewing. Doesn't go so well.
I've been meaning to write an essay about the word convince, which has its root in the Latin for with victory, to win over someone, versus persuade, which comes from this idea of like there's sweetness, it's really trying to find what will flow. There's a Latin root for the word flow in persuasion.
Oh.
And I think there's a big difference between trying to convince somebody, and it's like I win, you lose.
Yeah.
Versus persuading someone, which is finding a flow point for someone else. So I think,
Sorry, let me
yeah,
just finish
sure.
what I was saying, if you can hold
Please.
on to
Oh,
that
sorry.
idea.
Yeah, thank you.
No, no, just that when you hear how other people think about things, often they just are paying attention to something different, or they care about something different, and
Yeah.
doesn't make much sense to you. Or anyhow, you understand it. You might not agree with it, you might not like it, but okay, I get now why you're doing what you're doing. I get now what you care about. I get where you're coming from, literally.
Yes.
Point of that is whether or not you work with them, you can make wiser decisions about what you yourself can do. Oh, okay. If I included this element, or if I used this word, or if I went in this direction, maybe this would work better than what I was thinking about before. So that's what I mean
Mm,
by paying attention enough to see what you could try out. That's
mm,
all I'm saying.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
nothing more than that. But it's so different from convincing
Hmm.
that it needs to be underlined 4 times.
Well, so I want to, with the little bit of time we have left, I want to break down. I have another, like, 7-part question, but I'm going to try and link it together in one bigger question because I feel like we should get granular on some of the habits so that the listeners can sort of like have something to hold on to, some leverage points,
Yeah,
some cracks. And so one thing is, I myself was curious about habit number 2, which is just relating in 3 dimensions, because it seems like we're pointing at this, that in order to find these cracks, in order to relate to somebody deeply and sort of and able to engage in persuasion over long periods of time, we have to engage with them not just very superficially. And we could just have a beat about that particular habit. But I'm also curious about the other habits. I think books are conversations. I know that you did a lot of work to do a lot of community listening over the last year, at least, to have people work with you on this one, to have conversations about it. You boil it down to 7. And now that you're sharing it, I'm willing to bet that you're learning that one makes a lot of sense to people and resonates a lot, and one maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to people, or they're having a harder time with it. And there's one that you wish people were asking more about that
yeah,
they aren't asking about. So maybe there's a couple of habits
yeah,
we can zoom in on. I have ones that I'm interested. I don't know which ones are
yeah,
hardest for you and therefore interesting to you,
yeah.
or
Okay,
hardest for
so
people to get.
let's talk about 2 of them. But yes, so unlike my other books, as I explained in the Trevor Manuel story, this is a book about something I didn't understand. So it's not primarily based on my own experience. It's primarily based on the experience of the people I spoke to, and I had this book creating club that ultimately 300 people contributed to over many Google Docs and many Zoom calls, and it was really fun and creative in the sense that making a list of 7 things that is true and fresh and useful is not straightforward. So I'm very happy with the result, and it's a collective result, not an individual result. And people ask me, well, what did you leave out? What's the 8th one? I just like 7's a lot, man. Come back
I
when
know.
you've
I'm sure people told you that too. That are like, 7's too many. Make it 5.
yeah.
Can you do 3?
Yeah. So there's some of them are things I've thought about for a long time. Collaborating with unlike others has been the core of my work for decades. It's the subject of my book, Collaborating with the Enemy, which I've just rewritten completely. And looking for what's unseen is something that I think I'm pretty good at. Anyhow, I have a lot of experience with, and it's one of the things that working in diverse groups makes easy because you
Mm-hmm.
literally turn to your neighbor and say, "How do you see this?" But there were the working with cracks that we've spoken about. This was I had not thought about this, and the metaphor I think is very powerful. I want to come back to this at the end if you'll remind me. Uh, but the 2 I want to focus on right now. One that I think is pretty difficult to understand, unfortunately, and one that has really been challenging for me. And then we can end with this point about cracks.
Yeah.
So number 2 says relating in 3 dimensions, and it makes a point that I've been trying to make in different ways many times, and I've taken another run at it through in this book, and I think I finally nailed it in the book I worked on since then, the new edition
Mm.
of Collaborating with the Enemy. So let me try to explain it quickly. It's when I talk to you, Daniel, there's 3 different ways I can talk to you, and they're all real, they're all important, but they're not the same, and most people focus on only one. So one of them is I could think of Daniel as part of a larger whole. I don't know you well, but to take the simple example, we're together on this screen and we're the whole of
Mm,
this conversation. And I could think about, Daniel's questions and the inter the interaction me and Daniel as we together produce a whole, which
mm,
is this podcast. And that's people who think about systems thinking often focus on that. Like, I'm going to focus, if I'm interested in climate change, I'm going to focus on
mm,
how do each of us contribute to this global phenomenon called climate change. So that is paying attention to people as parts of larger wholes.
mm.
I say thinking of them as actors. So in this little play we're doing now, Daniel and Adam are actors, and
Yes.
we are together. We make up this podcast conversation. That's
Mm-hmm.
number one. Number two, which is complementary but is different, is I could think about Daniel as a whole in himself. What's Daniel's interest here? What's his ambition? What's his schedule today? What is he trying to do? How does he make his money? What's important to him? How does this fit in with his life plan and his career ambition? And that, I call that the party perspective, Daniel as a whole in himself. And in climate change, this is really important. When people go to a COP stands for Conference of the Parties. The big thing that's happening to a COP is a negotiation among the parties that are signatories to a treaty. They're not talking about in general, what can we all do to resolve climate change? They're talking about, this is what I need. I need you to put this in the text and I'll give you that. It's a negotiation among parties. And thirdly, there is the element of Daniel as a relative. We are kin in some way. This is not apparent to me, except in some general way. I don't know. You and I don't know each other personally. We don't have a relationship that I know about outside of this
Mm.
podcast. I can guess we might have some distant family
Well,
connections,
there's only
but
seven. We're all the children of seven daughters genetically, right?
okay.
There's
Well,
the
and that is this idea that we are related. So anyway, it's a long way of saying that habit two is pay attention to all three of these, which happen to be the elements in a system, performance of the system as a whole, and the relationship or structure among the elements.
yeah.
Sorry, that's everybody
No,
says to
no,
me,
it's
that's the one I didn't understand. So I'm trying to find a way. And in my other books, not in this book, I refer to this as love, power, and justice, which is a
yeah.
triad I've been very interested in. I think I finally figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many, not surprisingly, relationships between your books. I've been thinking about power and love, and collaborating with the enemy, and even some of the skills in facilitating breakthrough. Sort of like the
Yeah,
horizontal and versus the vertical, and
yeah,
suspending versus
yeah, exactly.
engaging, debating, and dialoguing. Uh,
Yeah,
but on the sort of this human to human outside of a facilitative context dialogical approach to say like this person is a whole person. This is
yes,
why people say like, oh, visualize this person as a naked person, or
yeah,
real, this person was just they were a baby, they were a child.
yeah, yeah,
Inside of each person is a child, but
yeah,
still we all can act like
yeah,
children and feel like children sometimes. Because in a way I took that to say like there's often things we want people to do, and we want them,
yeah,
there's a very transactional way
yes,
of horse trading and negotiation, and
yes,
realizing this person is just a person who their knees might be aching. And there's some people who are really good at relating on that human level first.
yeah,
I know in the story in
yeah,
that chapter you talked about some people who go around and during those COP events and relate as human beings first and as
yes,
signatories second. So
right,
to me, it was just a good reminder that
yeah. So
there's
that
many levels. Yeah.
human to human, that we are all relatives. The Native American invocation you hear often, all my relations, that's referring
Mm,
to that third element. The second element is we all are wholes with interests. And so when we say to people as facilitators, leave your agenda at the door, it's
mm,
a completely unreasonable, even manipulative request. The facilitator is not leaving their interests at the door. And yet we're all part of larger wholes. And that's where we started this conversation, systems thinking. So if we have time, I'll mention these two other points. The one that I find most challenging, and it was going to be a bit of a throwaway chapter at the end, but is now the first one, is the chapter called Act Responsibly, or Acting Responsibly, Habit 1. And it's just not, I'm a very pragmatic person. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, what's the right thing to do, at least in those words. But I've realized it really is crucial.
Hmm.
And the chapter is short because it's it's not offering a recipe, it's offering a riddle, which is figuring out for yourself what is your role in the system and what is your responsibility, and acting accordingly. And it relates back to what we said about outsiders, because Bill Torbert said to me years ago, if you're not, that old 60s expression, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. That's not the key point. The key point is if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. If you can't see how what you're doing or not doing is part of the way things are, then there's almost nothing you can do except from the outside by force. So that relates to the question of realizing I'm part of the system.
Yeah.
And this was new to me, and I find it challenging. And it's challenging, and it involves trade-offs. This is as far as I've got.
Mm. Acting responsibly can even just mean, and people, angels rush in, fools rush in where angels fear to tread, right? The unintended consequences of very simple. There's a video that I saw recently of, it was 1985. We were dumber people then. Cincinnati was like, we're gonna do the world's record of releasing balloons, and they released this shocking cloud of plastic, which then proceeded to like cover whatever lake was nearby
My
and
God.
impeded the Coast Guard rescue of like a boat that resulted in 2 deaths like a week later. And
Well,
everyone on the day was like, "Oh yeah, this is amazing and it's beautiful. Look at all these balloons." And what could possibly go wrong when we
yeah,
release a ton of plastic into the air? We don't often think
yeah,
what could plan, do, check, act, right? You
yeah,
talk about this cycle of acting carefully is certainly reasonable, but also
yeah.
you know
Well, and not just doing whatever you feel like doing or whatever is expected of you, but what's the
yeah,
responsible thing to do? And I'm not saying that's straightforward, but I am saying, or it's become more clear to me, this,
yeah,
well, most people would consider this obvious, but wasn't obvious to me to pay attention to what's outside of me and
yeah.
what's the responsible thing to do. So that's habit number. So we've
Mm.
talked about most of the habits now.
And so we were going to go back to cracks. I also just want to highlight, just as a structural insight, one of the pieces of feedback I got that I took to heart in my high school English class. Mr. Getz took my last paragraph and circled it and said, "You should have started here." And it's
Yeah,
so interesting that in a way this last are like, well, here's this other thing. Here's the coda: act responsibly, and it became the anchor point in the beginning, which I think is a
yeah.
really beautiful reminder to anybody in the process of editing your work. It sounds like a really interesting truism in this experience of
Yeah, well, I have a
creating the
great
book.
editor, Steve Piersante, and worked on the book with my eldest granddaughter, who's a tattoo artist and who did the drawings in the book. And she was the one who said to me, "Look, positionality matters, Grandpa. You have to
Yeah.
start with that." And I think she's right.
Yeah. I will make a plug for I had Leslie, God, I was just looking at her I had her on my podcast years ago, or actually around the same time that I had you on my show. She was the first person to really teach me about the importance of positionality. Dr. Leslie Ann Knowles, positionality is such an important aspect
Yeah,
of transforming a system. But
yeah,
we have moments left, and you wanted to circle back around to
yeah.
cracks,
To
and I'm not
cracks.
sure what the crack was in the cracks.
Well, what I wanted to say is I am from Montreal, and therefore I'm obliged. The rule is for every podcast, I have to quote Leonard Cohen at least once. And you are correct that he has a song, Anthem, where the refrain includes, "There's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." But I've realized in talking about the book that the two lines before that are equally, maybe more important. And particularly presenting this text in the current context, where so many people are feeling overwhelmed and frightened and in some cases paralyzed. What can I possibly do? And so the book is about what it doesn't tell people what to do, but it offers that all of us, any of us, can make a contribution to making systems work better for more people, and they can discover what to do with these 7 habits. So
Hmm.
the other part of the Leonard Cohen quote is, or refrain is, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I realized that those first 2 lines, ring the bells that still can ring, we all have things we can do. We all have bells we still can ring. And a requirement is to forget your perfect offering. Forget or give up this idea that I can't do anything until it's perfect, till I know everything is going to
Mm.
work, till it won't, that I have to be fully developed. The idea has to be fully developed. Everything has to be just right.
Mm.
And so I've come back to the full refrain, all 4 lines, and I think that's important in the context we're in.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful. It gives one goosebumps because forget your perfect offering is, and that points to habit number 5, experimenting your way forward. It doesn't have to
Yeah,
be perfect in order to offer it and to get things moving.
going. Yeah,
But I
exactly.
also feel like I want to just, maybe there's someplace else you'd like to end, but there is an interesting challenge here because there is this assumption that yes, we are all part of the system and we can all, just by changing who we are and how we show up, start to change how the system behaves. But certainly with climate change, I think there's this heavy burden that many people feel that I have to. I mean, yes, you should take your bags with you when you go shopping instead of buying one at the store. Yes, you should reduce air travel, but there are big actors in these systems who,
Yes.
and I feel like it can be challenging to sort of locate the
Yeah.
responsibility on individuals.
Yeah. I'm not, I think I'm not saying,
Yeah.
I'm not saying change how you think, change how you are, the world will change. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't believe that. But what I am saying is there's a contribution that each of us can make,
Yes.
and we have to figure out what that is. And it may well be running for Congress, or lobbying for a law, or picketing outside a gas station, or developing a new technology or promoting a new technology. I'm not saying it's just work by individuals. I'm just making the perfectly obvious point that
Yes.
even collective action requires each person to do something. And the book is saying this is how to figure out your next move.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. The reason I asked that question is, my wife, who may wind up listening to this episode, is one of these people who wears it heavily. And I think we need to balance our own burden versus finding the cracks that we can create leverage on. And I really appreciate you doing the work that you do because I believe these are high leverage interventions, giving all of the people out there these habits, especially when you think about the habit of resting and persisting, giving everyone a reminder that these are day-to-day habits and it's a long game. I really appreciate all the work that you've done. Is there anything I have not asked you that I should ask you, or any parting comments with our last literal seconds?
No, it's great. Thank you.
Okay. Where should people who want to learn more about all things Adam Kahane? I mean, there's all of your books are really good. People should read Power and Love. They should read Collaborating with the Enemy. Where would you like people to go to learn more about all things you?
Adam Kahane.
There you go. Well, listen, Adam, I really appreciate you making time to talk about these things. Obviously, these are things you like talking about, but I appreciate you. You could have been anywhere in the world, and I appreciate you spending some time with me. These are really, really great nuggets,
Pleasure.
and I look forward to sharing them with the world.
Thank you.